Deborah. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Kelly Parker, how are you?
I am great. Any chance to talk with you was always amazing and uplifting. So I'm excited.
Me too. I
Well,
had a
let's,
great conversation with you last week. It was so nice to just hang with you.
yeah, it was. It was. It really was so good. Well, let our listeners know who you are and what you do.
Well, I focus on amplifying people's voices through conversation. That's my passion. Um, I guess comparing it to amplifying voices through one-way communications, I like when there's a dialogue. And
Yeah.
I am the vice president of stories and voices for a platform called Swell,
Mhm.
which enables you to pick up your phone and just hit record. And in the platform, you can leave about 5 minutes of your voice and say anything you want, along with a picture and a link. And then it kind of sits there in the world of Swell, and people hear it and then they reply with their voice. And it's not live, so it enables you to really listen and really speak without feeling like someone's going to run over you. And so the website people go to listen is swellcast.com. And if they want to reply to something they hear, they just download the app and go back to that conversation and then reply. So I'm in the business of just nurturing connection and community. And there's no limit to what that can do for the world, I guess.
That's amazing. I've been thinking a lot about voice and thinking about you. I've been thinking about voice. And there's something almost vulnerable about using our voice. Often we hide behind the keyboard because there's something almost a little bit more anonymous about just your words, but there's something about hearing one another's voice that really kind of takes it to another place. From your perspective, what do you think is so powerful and meaningful about us using our voices?
It's primal. I think it's primal. Keyboards came later, writing came later, grunts came early.
Yeah.
It's how we express ourselves, and words can be very powerful, and tone could be even more powerful. And I also think you can't hide behind a voice because it's your authenticity that's coming across. You can't say, oh, I didn't mean that. Your voice really shows what you mean. We are so naked with our voice, and those of us who crave that get so much from listening. And that's what's so seductive about voice in general. I think that their minds engage more. There's a study that I remember I worked on behalf of a lot of adult literacy projects in a nonprofit I ran for about 15 years.
Mhm.
And they talked about the power of the mind. When you're shown a lot of stuff, your mind does less. When your mind has to engage and imagine, the mind does more. So in the case of reading, you're doing all the files in your filing cabinet. But when you're watching a movie, it's giving you the sound and the audio and the music and the picture. You're just consuming it, but you're not having to imagine it. So when we listen to something, I think we use our minds more engaged, I think, in listening, talking than we are consuming and reading and typing.
Awesome. And I think because of that, some of us can be afraid to use our voices
Yeah.
because it does feel so vulnerable. And I think sometimes we've been taught not to trust our voices.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. How
how
did
do
you, how did you, I was gonna ask you, how did, I'm gonna put it right back into your plate just for a second, because you
yes,
touched on
ma'am.
something that's so moving, which is, that leap. How did you leap from quiet to voice?
That's so interesting because in ways I have and in ways I haven't. So I have venues in which I'm very comfortable. So I do one-on-one very well. I also do one-to-many very well, interestingly. Like you could put me on the stage.
I saw it.
Yeah, at a stadium. I don't care. But if we're at a dinner party or some type of social thing, that's a little trickier for me to navigate. So I like to play up where I'm comfortable and then try to take those risks where I'm not. So try to push myself out of my comfort zone, like both of them, like figuring out what's my sweet spot and then trying to grow in those spaces where it feels a little weird. Um, and then I just look for the one. So me, I know I do well one-on-one. So even if I'm in a crowd, well, who is the one person I can talk to, or what is the one thing I can find that's in common with somebody to kind of get it going. But the more that I do that, I realize Like, I feel like I'm the only one like that, and I'm not. A lot of people are like that, you know? Like, the more that, speaking about vulnerability and being authentic, the more people that I share with, like, hey, this is not comfortable for me or whatever, they're like, oh, me too. I'm trying to get home. I'm trying to get back home, you know? So I think the more that we tell our stories and talk about what's really going on, we find common ground with people.
You know, the dinner party is terrifying
Yeah.
because you have to compete with um, this repartee that's going on, and you think someone's going to step over your voice, and you're not keeping people's attention, and there's this layer of social anxiety that's on top of you always,
Yeah.
except if you choose not to let that be true. I mean, there is a moment where you can pivot and say, you know what, everything I just said is true, but I'm not going to let it be impacting me. Um, and that's a gentle space to create as well. If you start that in your own space, if you're at a dinner party with 5 people, right?
Right.
Hopefully they're your friends and you're just going to
Hopefully.
riff and have a great time. If there's
Yeah.
a couple of people that are your friends, make them your friends, and then all of a sudden it dissipates. I think social
Yeah.
anxiety is fascinating when it comes to voice, but Swell is interesting because it's asynchronous, so people can't get bullied by
Hmm.
someone else talking over them or interrupting them, which is
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah.
To
And
feel like you have the stage.
I really appreciate that, because I think that's part of the reason why I thrive on the stage, because it's my turn to speak and no one's going to cut me off while I
That's right.
gather my thoughts. It's my turn. And when I'm done, I'll sit down and go back to not saying anything. But I like the idea of, this is my time, you know, because there's something tricky for some people. How do I insert myself in the conversation, and that dance of not getting cut off or cutting someone else off and all that good stuff. So, so yeah, I really
Mhm.
love that. So the idea of being authentic. For some of us, there's a conflict between being authentic, but I also want to be seen as credible and competent and on top of my game. So, from your perspective, how do all of those kind of players work together to, you know, give us that? Because some of us think they work
Yeah.
against each other, but how do you see them all kind of synchronizing together?
Well, that's a great question because we choose to name things and delineate things. We choose to do that. That's a choice, right? What you just said, and you even intimated that maybe that's not an accurate assessment. I think the word credibility and top of our game, again, we're inserting a kind of a compare and despair mentality. And I think that there are people who are very erudite and have a lot of command from more of a substantive, like, I have stats for you. I could cite these truths. I'm a politician. I have all these um, references to history. I have all these things that help bring my credibility up. And that is absolutely 100% true, because we're looking for credibility, especially now in this post-truth world. We want someone to speak with a sense of connection to something besides their own ego, besides their own ideas and opinions. So I think it's a balance. I find myself a lot in conversations that have to do with more of the human experience and more about why we are doing what we're doing as opposed to the what that we're doing.
Mhm.
I'm interested in the motivation behind the action itself, and that's kind of the sort of the soup I tend to live in more than not. But if I was a somebody who based my entire career on a science or on research or on being sort of an ambassador for a certain cause or party or whatever, I would be on the top of my game with those ideas, those quotes, those stats to bring credibility. But I also think that can be a little bit of a shield sometimes to deflect your own essence by being an encyclopedia of facts.
Mm.
So I think it's a balance. When I drop into someone, it's usually because they come off as a beautiful human being. And that might be a mixture of their discipline to have so much knowledge and understanding, but it's also their their passion for connection that really draws me in.
Mm. That's so good, because I think, you know, in our quest to be taken seriously and have success and all the things, we're like, oh, well, I got to know all the facts and I got to read bigger books and stay up later at night. But I know I'm finding personally that building true connection with people, it yields success in life, in business, in all the areas, because we're people at the end of the day looking to connect with people in a real way.
Yeah.
The other thing that came to my mind about voice is I think we all know and can remember the time when we first heard the sound of our own voice
Mhm.
and thought, who the heck is that? You
You mean
know?
when it was recorded, when you heard it back?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Like hearing it back. Like, what is happening? You know?
Yeah.
And I think it's the first introduction to the idea of, oh, people might perceive me in a different way than I perceive myself.
Yeah.
Like, there's this way that I'm like coming off in the world that I had no idea about. I thought I was this and you all thought I was that, you know?
It's
And
amazing.
yeah. And then I think, well, I want to hear from you because I think sometimes we take that and get caught in the fear of it. Like, oh, what are people going to think of me? You know, like,
Mhm.
oh, if I get really real or, you know, if I stop hiding behind encyclopedias or whatever, like, I don't know if I really want to do that. How do you encourage or coach people through that space?
Modeling first and foremost, that, if anything besides modeling is such a tangent away, and it brings you into the kind of the cerebral space of possibility and theory. But the only way I can ever ask people to drop in is for me to drop in first. And that's how I behave on Swell, generally within reason. And I behave that way in my family and in my social circles. I feel very aware that life is such a precious um, gift, and to be real inside it most of the time is a really beautiful thing to experience. Like to not have that dinner party anxiety, to really say, you know, um, I just want to be real in it right now, and I want to connect to my flow, and it might be messy, it might not be articulate, I might have lots of pauses, I might cry, or I might make a mistake and say something that's actually not fully true or accurate. And just the idea of assuming kindness on the part of others makes for a very safe place to step in and be authentic. And that's the circle of trust you want to build, but you have to do it by being one of those people as opposed to talking about being one of those people.
Oh, that's so good. A lot of times that's what leadership is going first. And sometimes
That's
that's
right.
what it takes is sharing that thing. And it might not be the depths of your soul, but it might be something that gives everyone else permission to feel like what you said, oh, this can be a
Mhm.
place of trust, a place of safety for me. Um, it makes me think about, you know, nowadays, plenty of companies are trying to figure out how to architect a culture where people feel safe and they feel valued and they feel all of those
That's right.
things. And it seems that you can't really divorce that from giving people space to be authentic and being willing to model that for them. So,
I also think there's a balance that I'm sort of a little bit obsessed with in this moment in my life.
yeah.
And that balance being, how do you include people while you're being so authentic, in a way that they feel safe with your authenticity? In other words, if someone is on a real mission to talk about something, and it feels like you're so strong in who you are that there could be a wall that someone else puts up because they're afraid of how alive you are. And how do
Mm,
you don't want to be small, you want to stay big, and you want to stay truthful, and you want to stay in that like push of, this is what I'm feeling, this is who I am. But there's a diplomacy of inclusiveness that has to come in, and it's so nuanced.
mhm,
It's like so nuanced, and I think the more we talk about the troubles of our lives with respect to equity and diversity and inclusion, we have to figure out how to include people in the journey and not just point at them saying, you don't understand me, you don't see
mhm.
me, but rather say, come understand me, come see me.
Yeah, agree. So I know in your work, you've probably heard a ton of stories, all sorts.
Oh my God. Just
So
today.
I bet. So, in all that you've heard, what would you say are the characteristics of a really memorable story?
Oh, that's a great question. And I'm happy you're asking it because I'm thinking about that a lot lately.
Yeah,
Self-discovery is really interesting when you talk about a transformation and people are like, what?
yeah.
You know, what happened next? Not drama, not like the plot, but like your own moment of transformation is a great ingredient to a story. because you're not once removed. You're like, this is what happened to me, and I want to share it with you in case you relate. I have to tell you, a woman came on today that blew my mind. She was really emotional and she was really clear. She had a rant. She noticed on her birth certificate that it said Negro. And she's like, I want that off my birth certificate. I want to be an African American. I don't want to be told I'm Negro. And she got so irate to see that on her birth certificate that she wants to do a petition to the state to get it removed. And she felt so many emotions around that word. And I just sat there riveted, because in her communication with us, she had some new thoughts. Like in her communication, there was something happening. She went from quiet, like, here's what's going on, to like pitch fever. And she didn't turn off the swell. She kept it. And she said, I trust you. I'm going to keep this going, and I'm going to give you my thoughts. And I just need you to know what I'm feeling. And that's a decision that I wish we'd make more, where we can trust that we can be at the pitch of our emotion, but not alienate people. That's a really important ingredient, I think. I also think that things don't have to be so heavy and serious to be a great story. Obviously, it was great. But I think in conversation, it's not so much the arc of a story, because that's like almost a podcast, right? One-way communication. I went here, I did this, I feel this, I'm so great. That's boom, one way. What we create in dialogue, what you and I are doing, is we're creating an iteration of the topic, so that you posit, like, this is what I'm going through, this is what happened, this is what I'm feeling, my observation. What do you think? That opens the door for every possibility. And that's a really good Swellcast, at least, because Swellcasting is really about hosting very well, and you do it very well, to include people in that. Hey, I heard you. Thank you for that. Hey, Deb, I love your response. Here's what it triggered for me. And it's that beautiful cycle of just connection and iteration that makes something blow out of the water. Like, oh my God, look where this went. One more story about this that's really interesting to me. About 2 years ago, maybe even, a woman came on. She lives in Doha. She's was taking off her hijab, decided to take it off her hijab, and she wanted to tell us about it. And I felt honored that she chose Swell to give us pictures of before and after, and show us that, you know, she still is Muslim, but she divorced her oppressive husband, and she just wanted to get off her hijab. And in Doha, that's not so easy. And she chose to trust us to be in the process with her, and offered us the experience. And it was very emotional, and it was also joyful. It was celebrating her decision. And it was like, wow, this can't happen anyplace else. This is really cool. But it gave me the sense of like, we make decisions every day about who to include in our lives. And by you inviting me to your podcast, you're including me in your life. You're saying, Deb, let's hang and talk. And that invitation has so much power, because it's showing me that I matter, and that you're curious, and that you want me to feel like you matter. And we take this half hour and we're like, we matter. And that's a gift. It's a gift. And people go through years of not feeling like they matter. So I always think about those people.
Yeah, I love that, because there's something about, like you were just saying, telling a story, and in the process of telling it, there's value in you telling it, but you're also coming up to this higher level of thinking as you're telling the story. You might be getting new insights that you didn't have in the beginning. And again, to your point, you're inviting other people to share with you. It comes to a point where we share the story. Now it's not just mine, it's ours. It's an experience that we all share together, which is really amazing. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
one of the things that you mentioned to me before that has really stuck with me, you talked about building a culture of conversation. And we were talking about how stories often just come out of talking. They come out of having a conversation with someone. And I thought about the idea inside of organizations or businesses to make sure that we're slowing down enough to talk to each other.
Yeah.
To get the stories, because often we've got our things to do and deadlines to meet and all those things. And we forget the value of slowing down to talk to each other. So for those that might be wanting to nurture that type of culture or build it, how would you advise them to forge ahead?
That's a great question. I know how committed you are to corporate culture, so I appreciate its application and sort of walking the talk as it is. Like, I think I've the other half of my life before Swell was doing a lot of corporate engagement work. I did a lot of workshops and a lot of ice breaking culture things, and it was amazing to drop into corporate culture and see the cancers that live inside of bad culture, and really finding people at their wits' end about what am I going to do? I have to leave, or I don't know what to do. Uh, One of the intentional things that can shift a culture into a culture conversation is to, like you said, institutionalize, if you will, a conversation community, a community where you discuss things. You know, the concept of Ubuntu, the tribal concept of Ubuntu from Africa talks about I am who I am because of those around me. And Mandela talks about this a lot, like this idea of what the circle really represents. It represents equanimity, but it also represents a seeing of everybody. Everybody sees each other in a circle, right? So the idea of connecting and doing circling up in your business units, not the whole company, but each business unit has a time, a Friday at 3 o'clock or a Thursday at 8 o'clock in the morning, where they say, we're going to circle up. And we're not going to impose the theme. We're not going to it's not going to be a bitch session. It's going to be a place where we can ask people how their week has gone and what's going on that they want to share. And it's a talking stick, and you pass the talking stick. That's a primal, basic integration of conversation culture. Something even more clever that I've done with corporations that blows the roof off of everything is you institute a once a month show and tell, where everybody brings a little object and they have 3 minutes to talk about it. And no questions, just 3 minutes to talk about the object. And when everyone's done in the room, an hour and a half later or something, you have like a pizza or ice cream or something, and everyone's mingling around, and they walk up to you and say, man, I can't believe that watch from your grandfather is like 120 years old. Can I see it again? Where'd your grandfather come from? And all of a sudden, you and me are talking at a level that we haven't talked to in 5 years. So it's that intimacy, it's the invitation for intimacy that's not driven by productivity. It's driven by something much more profound, which is connectivity, which affects productivity.
Ooh, ooh. That's a writer downer. Connectivity affects productivity.
It's a writer downer.
Yeah, it is.
But isn't that your gut too? Like you
Yes.
know, if you're sitting next to somebody for 12 years and you don't know who they are, you're not going to be having their back.
Right. It's so true. And I love that. So it's show and tell of something that has to do with you as a human being. It's not your spreadsheet from last week's project. We gotta be clear.
Here's my Excel spreadsheet for last month's numbers.
Right. Okay. I really enjoy that. I do. So, all right. You've shared a couple examples with us about the transformations that have taken place in terms of sharing stories and elevating our voices. Do any other examples come to mind in terms of transformations that people have experienced or results that they've gotten in terms of simply listening to voices, listening to stories?
Yeah. There's so many. Every day I get blown away by what I'm invited to and what I create with people in conversation. And I there's so many things that are swirling in my head right now about the personal transformation aspect. There's a woman that came on Swell many years ago, when we first started, and she talks about how she learned that she was slightly autistic in her 40s. So she went through life as a person without a diagnosis, and then she found out she was slightly autistic, and she spoke to that on Swell without the fear of stigma. By the way, this is who I am. Oh my God. Anyway, people came on and talked about their late stage diagnosis. If it wasn't about autism, it was about ADHD or something else. And there's a culture on Swell that's very interesting, where people do talk about some very personal things that normally would be really not shamed, but just in the shadows, right? And she set an example. I think she was one of the first people to do that. The other really profound experience I had was my friend's son transitioned to be a daughter in his late 20s or mid 20s. And she was generous enough to walk me through her process, with a picture of herself as a man, very built up and worked at a bar and in construction, to this whole other beautiful creature she is just in herself. And she walked us through all the processes of that, and the stigma of that, and the fear of that, and the rejection of that, and the celebration of that. Every emotion is in that conversation, and it takes a certain amount of interest to listen to it. But also it sets a standard of like, if we can't talk about it, something's wrong with us. We got to talk about it. Even if there's polarization, the civility can happen, and we can talk about it.
I love that. Well, thank you, Deb. This has been such a cool chance for us to connect again. But let us know where we can connect with you and how we can get hooked up with Swell.
Oh my gosh. First of all, thank you for inviting me to sit with you today. It's always so great to just hang with people and talk. I mean, that's obvious from this last half hour. Anyone can go to swellcast.com. Just go there first, and you'll get to listen. You could type in search words, and you could type in, you'll see my face there. You'll see a lot of other faces there. A lot of the users are right on that page, and you can click in and just listen. And then from there, it shows you how to click in to get to Swell and start riffing and talking and being part of the community. But you could just listen and not download the app for a while to get used to the conversation. But I encourage people, obviously, to think about the idea of a disruption of podcasting, where you can just pick up your phone, put out a missive, people hear it, and you're in conversation. And it's a new way of seeing audio and hearing audio and creating audio. So I encourage anybody who wants to do that. Kelly's on it. I interviewed her, and it was pretty awesome, which created this whole connection. And connections are crazy. Like, you can just meet so many cool people. So that's where you can find me, swellcast.com. And thank you for setting this up and for doing what you're doing. And it's just, it's not easy to book and to create and to publish all this. And I think it's of great value. So thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Can't wait till the next time we get together.